I am happy to go first. Somebody at our 50th anniversary asked us if we would do a webinar on interim committees. So since we follow many of them closely, thank you, Mindy. This is what we have prepared. We're going to talk through a whole lot of what's going on in all these various interim committees, and then I'm going to show you how you can both find this information on the internet as well as sign up for alerts, so you can make sure that you are on a list and get emails regarding that committee if there's a specific committee you want to follow. Durf has a hard deadline at 5 o'clock, so he's going to go first. And if you have questions for him, let's go ahead and make sure you ask them at that time, because he won't be around at the very end. And then as a teaser to have you stay on the whole time, we'll talk a little bit about tomorrow's rate case decision that the Public Service Commission is going to be making to raise rates by 28% for residential customers. So we'll give you a little background on that, but let's start with Durf.
Well, before I even dive into it, I just wanted to touch base briefly on what the heck an interim committee is. So normally the Montana legislature meets every other year on odd numbered years for 90 days. And it's very similar to the Schoolhouse Rocks and how a bill becomes a law and there's committees, etc. During the interim, the period between when the legislature meets, the legislature still does some business. And one of the ways that they accomplish that is through a different set of interim committees, ranging from criminal stuff to labor stuff to certainly environmental issues, which is what we track. And we're going to go through some of the committees that we track. They are important. They are important because sometimes the discussions that occur during these interim committees will ultimately be the foundation for legislation that may be considered. Traditionally, the committee structures were such that they were very bipartisan. They tried to really have a 50-50 split on the interim committees. This past legislative session, they've changed it pretty significantly so that the committee structure is more representative, I guess, of the legislature, unfortunately, in a way that is really skewed towards the majority party at this point. That being said, we are monitoring these committees to see what may happen, what recommendations they may have for legislation when the legislature actually meets. So I guess that's really the big important part of what we do in the interim. And going through this list, I'm going to quickly pass it off to Ann Schwend, who's going to talk about water storage and exempt wells. And then I'm going to talk about water quality stuff for the Water Policy Interim Committee.
All right. Thanks, Durf. Yeah, so both of us, Durf and I both work on water issues, and the way we've parsed that out a little bit is I tend to focus more on the water quantity pieces, and Durf does a lot of the water quality stuff. So we're both tracking the Water Policy Interim Committee. This is a committee that's been in place for a number of years and quite a few sessions. The first thing at their meeting that they had just 2 weeks ago, there was a discussion about water storage, and the committee is really interested in paying attention to what kinds of storage capabilities do we have in the state right now. They're mandated, DNRC is mandated to give them an annual or biennial storage report. So they provided that, but they're also looking at where are places that we can potentially be storing more water. This is an area that I'm tracking quite a bit because I'm really interested in getting them to think about storage, not just in traditional reservoirs where we think about storage and what we did in the 20s and 30s and the Pick Sloan era, but also begin to think about natural storage and where can we be a little bit more diversified in our storage approaches, and whether that's managed aquifer recharge or it's just thinking about wetlands and riparian areas and natural flooding and floodplains. So there is a discussion on that, and that's going to be ongoing that I think will be pretty interesting to follow. The second thing was they had a report from DNRC on the history of exempt wells, but also this CWR stands for the Comprehensive Water Review Committee, and that's a stakeholder working group that DNRC stood up last year, and they did bring some legislation forward. House Bill 114 and Senate Bill 72 were two pieces of legislation this last session that came forward. House Bill 114 passed unanimously. Senate Bill 72 did not. But this comprehensive water review group is looking at post-adjudication. What's that going to look like when we have finalized adjudication in the state? Measurement, and then exempt wells. And the exempt well discussion, I think, is particularly interesting as it relates to land use planning. The exempt well group is a sub-working group of this DNRC Comprehensive Water Review, and they have, the whole group is hosting meetings, and then they have these subgroups that are working on these specific topics. The exempt well group will have a meeting October 31st. And that's at DNRC, at DNRC headquarters. And you can just Google DNRC Comprehensive Water Review if you want more information on the specifics on that. A lot of information on exempt wells. And just as a teaser, I think I believe, did we set the date, Durf? November 30th, we are actually going to do a webinar on sort of exempt well discussion, what they are, what they mean, and how does that fit into and drive a lot of land use planning. So mark your calendars for that. And then I'll pass it back to you, Durf, on the water quality piece.
Great. And two other things that we've been sort of monitoring that the WIPIC Water Policy Interim Committee is considering or getting updates on primarily at this point, for my two pieces, are the issue over selenium pollution from Canada and the nutrient standards issue. I could talk for a long time about nutrient pollution coming from Canada. But the long and the short of it is basically that there's some very large metallurgical coal mines just north of the Canadian border that are releasing large volumes of selenium pollution that then travels down the Kootenai into Lake Kootenai and continues down into Idaho. Montana has established a water quality standard specific for that region to try and address this issue. And there has been intense lobbying from Teck Coal, the company that is operating these facilities, on the state DEQ and at the legislature. And they haven't gotten too far yet, but there's some intense lobbying going on to try and push back on Montana asserting some of these water quality standards. So there was a recent update in front of WIPIC in which the International Joint Commission, the IJC, which is an entity established to resolve these types of disputes between Canada and the United States, presented. And the Rob Sisson, the person who's been appointed to that position, presented. And what I did here was that there is a real possibility that there's going to be what's called an IJC referral, which would be fantastic. I think that's really what needs to happen here. And what that is this IJC process kicks in and evaluates and makes recommendations for how this needs to be resolved. It's a dispute resolution body, and it has been used in the past effectively. And I am hoping that the IJC, that it actually takes this issue on. There's been some pushback from Governor Gianforte and from Senator Daines, who do not want to see an IJC referral occur. Senator Tester has been in support of it. Hopefully, we do get that IJC referral, though. And it sounded positive at the last hearing but I guess it's sort of a wait and see. The other big thing is the nutrient standards update that happened this past EQ or WIPIC. Long story short, there is Montana used to have, and still technically does have, a numeric nutrient standard, a number that you can't go above when you pollute. And Montana attempted to go to what's called a narrative standard, which is are the correct bugs in the water and are the correct plants in the water. It's a much more technical, difficult to monitor, difficult to enforce standard that industry really likes. Thankfully, the EPA rejected an immediate sort of change to that narrative standard. However, Montana is still proceeding with drafting proposed rules to shift Montana to a narrative standard. So this is an ongoing sort of issue, and we suspect there is going to be a set of rules that are going to be proposed sometime this fall in order to comply with the rulemaking requirements for when rules are adopted before a legislature starts. And so that's probably something we're going to ask you all to engage in, is these narrative rulemaking, proposed regulations, and the actual rulemaking process. So those are the two big pieces for me on WIPIC. And it looks like there is a set of meetings already scheduled for the next WIPIC meetings, so you can follow along. Each interim committee has a website where you can get all the materials, agenda, and even watch in while they meet. Okay, do you want to maybe go to the next slide?
Yeah, I was going to see if anybody had questions about this slide before we move on. Great. Okay.
EQC. This is like a really tough nut. This is a really tough committee. It's very industry friendly committee, and it's a sort of a difficult place when you want to see good environmental legislation rulemaking come out of. However, this is also something that we follow, and the EQC actually is sort of created as a oversight mechanism for Montana's Environmental Policy Act, as well as some of the other major environmental laws that we have here in Montana. And so they not only have this interim committee and legislators, but a set of staffers called the Environmental Quality Council Office that are located in the legislature that do research and reports and any number of things on how our environmental laws are being administered, how effective they are, et cetera. And so EQC is scheduled to meet this coming November. There's a bunch of stuff on the docket. We thought the most important and interesting thing for a lot of our members might be the cleanup over at the Smurfit Stone Mill. This is the former pulp mill on the banks of the Clark Fork River that shuttered, I think, maybe about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and is now there's a lot of concerns over carcinogens and other toxics and the cleanup of that site. And so EQC is going to be asking for regular reports and an actual study on how that might best be addressed in cooperation with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. We, MEIC, are not following this too closely. What often we lean on local partners when something like this is super technical that they're engaged in. And the Clark Fork Coalition has been a dog on a bone on this and really following it. So if you have real sort of technical questions on it, I'd really encourage you to reach out to them. But they're really looking into that cleanup of the Smurfit site. The other thing that the EQC that I'm pretty concerned about is this rare earth metals buzzword, I guess you could say, but there are certainly going to be some metals needs with the energy transition, not just base metals, but also some other metals that we're going to need. And industry has taken that and run with it and basically said that We need to open up, a bunch of new mines, etc. And while they're partially right, certainly we're not excited about mining everywhere at any point in time. And certainly we don't need to. There's a lot of other alternatives, include recycling, etc. There's going to be more mining, but we don't want to see it done in a bad way, and we don't want to see it done in a way that is unnecessary. So recently there was a presentation from a gentleman from the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology on Montana's rare earth potential. The thing about rare earth metals is actually they're not all that rare. They're everywhere, but they're concentrated in some places more than others, such as potentially, there's a lot of interest recently in this bitterroot situation down in the Sheep Creek area. And so at this point, it really was sort of an education hour for legislators on rare earth elements, the statutory scheme for how hard rock mines are permitted, as well as how it occurs on federal land. No specific proposals, but my sort of concern is that there might be some proposals that come out of this EQC discussion about relaxing environmental laws in order to encourage rare earth and critical mineral development. So this is something I'm monitoring pretty closely, along with a few other organizations. And the last one on here, the Yellowstone train spill. What a debacle. Basically, for those of you that don't know, there was a big train crash right over a bridge that happened just outside of Billings with a bunch of asphalt in it that dumped a bunch of garbage into the river, and they are finding carcinogenic elements in the water and in the fish, and have issued a fish advisory at this point. There's a lot of unanswered questions in terms of how long this stuff may linger, the impact for what exact chemicals are actually in the water and what they might cause. So partially, the EQC is sort of going to be monitoring this, and certainly we are. We've just recently signed out on actually to a letter along with a number of other organizations to request an update in the Billings community about all of the ramifications of this particular train spill, like a public hearing where they provide the public with information on this, because this is a pretty serious problem. And hopefully they'll have some more answers in the near term, but that's something that we're demanding right now. So big picture, EQC, tough place for those who are concerned about environmental protection. But it's something that we continue to monitor, and they are just now sort of finalizing the agenda or work plan of things that they're going to work on. If you go to their website, you can see a more detailed agenda of all of the different things that they're going to potentially be considering and evaluating for the coming year.
Great. Any questions for DERF? I think we'll be sure to share websites for all these different committees soon, but DERF has to jump. So I want to make sure if you have questions for him.
And I'll throw my email in the chat here for everybody, just so you have it if you have any questions and you want to follow up with me on.
Great. Well, thanks, DERF. We're going to move on to local government.
Okay, and that's back in my bailiwick. Probably the biggest thing the local government is working on is the land use legislation. If you guys remember, that was Senate Bill 382, also known as the Land Use Planning Act, that the League of Cities and Towns and Kelly Lynch really put forward. We were supportive of that bill initially, but then when they decided to opt counties out of the need for doing this comprehensive planning, then we were less in favor of it. And there were some other issues in terms of public notification that we tried to get some amendments on, but it didn't happen. But moving forward, Senate Bill 382 The top cities in the state, remember that the seven largest cities are all going to be responsible for implementing this Senate Bill 382, or this comprehensive land use planning bill. So the local government is the committee, the interim committee, that's really tracking that and seeing how well that's going. There was a presentation at their last meeting from Kelly Lynch about where they are. There are a couple of cities that are beginning to make some changes and sort of lining up. And I believe those include, that's Bozeman and possibly Missoula. There's also a rumor that there are a couple of counties that may opt in to taking on this comprehensive planning process, and that's Missoula County and Lewis and Clark County. So we're waiting to see if that is what happens. It's a bill that I feel like it's a better approach for doing sort of this larger planning at the outset, and then, as you know, if a community is really engaged in that, then later, when there are specific proposals that come forward or projects, they become a little bit more administrative as long as they comply with the larger comprehensive plan that the community had defined. The other really beneficial part of that is going to be that it's going to generate a whole lot of, hopefully, data ahead of time that the Department of Commerce and Department of Revenue and other state agencies will be providing data for the cities to do things like housing assessments, or really understanding what their planning needs are, housing or infrastructure or other community needs, as well as natural resources. So stay tuned. That's going to be something that the local government is tracking pretty closely. And then the next thing that they had that I thought might be of interest to everyone was the Department of Commerce did a presentation on rental affordability. And I just took a little clip from the PowerPoint that Department of Commerce, Cheryl Cohen, did a really good presentation, and you can find that on the local government website. But looking at, oftentimes when we're talking about median family income or low income or extremely low income, here's some numbers. This tells you what we're talking about. And the piece that was really notable for me when she was talking about rental affordability is, if you look at the extremely low income category, which is a family of four trying to live on $25,000, she said that there are 28,000 extremely low income renters in the state of households in the state of Montana. And currently there are 12,891 affordable places where these families can actually live, meaning that there is a deficit of over 15,000 homes that are needed to be able to house these extremely low income families. And I feel like that's kind of indicative, and I think it's getting worse. These are the families that are really qualifying for, the low end. Anyway, it was sort of a little interesting tidbit that was on there that I thought I'd share with you. Local government doesn't have a whole bunch of other things going on, but I think they may take up some more items later in the session or later in this interim. So any questions on that? Going over it kind of quickly. Okay, I will put a link to that website as well.
We got a question from Mindy.
Okay, go ahead, Mindy.
And this really goes for all the interim committees. Who sets the agenda on what they're going to be looking at? Is it just the chair? Obviously with this interim committee, we're talking only 1/4 are Democrats, and the other ones were 1/3. But do they decide mutually, or is it just dictated by somebody?
That's a great question, Mindy. And typically in most sessions, it's my understanding that often, and particularly right toward the end of the session, there are a number of study bills that get proposed. And there were a whole bunch of study bills this session that actually didn't go through when sine die occurred sooner than they expected. And so like one of them was the bill that we had on putting a graduated fee on short-term rentals. It was about to make it through and it didn't. So normally you have study bills and then they get assigned to the different committees, and then the committee decides how much time they're going to allocate to that. This session, there weren't a whole lot of study bills that made it through. And so the first meeting that each committee has, they have a discussion. The committee members bring forward topics that they're interested in or that they've heard from their constituents that they're interested in. And then the committee as a whole sort of discusses those and decides which things they will track and how much time they will allocate for that. So it's kind of a democratic process as much as it can be, with the balance being a little bit tipped in the committees now. But each committee has a work plan that they will follow.
And then at Mindy, I would say also everything Ann said, plus each committee is different. And it depends on who your chair is as to how they decide who's going to speak. And how much time they want to really allocate to various things. They have a work plan, it's voted on, and it's certainly partisan in these committees that are now partisan. But it's generally it's always up to the chair. Some chairs are more egalitarian than others when it comes to what the agenda is going to look like for each meeting.
And of course, that's true within the session as well. So the other question that I have that's sort of related is, well, before we leave that, can citizens somehow interact and make a difference on looking at certain study bills that didn't make it through? And if you had 7 people write in letters to any given committee, will that hold any sway at all? And then I'm going to say one other question that's kind of unrelated as well, and you can answer them both. But there are many bills that are still stuck in the judicial system, and whether or not the judiciary review of constitutionality or legality, well, it is constitutionality of bills, whether or not that holds any sway to any of the study bills that might be considered, even though they aren't bills anymore.
So the public, they do allow public comment. But I'm going to say, that probably needed to occur at the first meeting that they had the first time that the committee meets right after the legislature during the interim is when they take topics, or they, allow people to sort of pose potential topics that they want to see. Possibly you can influence it, or possibly you contact someone who's on the committee and ask them to bring that forward as something that they felt like is important. So right now, I'm not sure that it would be, you can't really add a new topic in there for them to discuss, but there are always opportunities, for a little public comment at the meetings that they have. Anne, you want to add anything to that? No. So I tried to get the short-term rental bill, even though the study didn't get passed during the legislative session. I tried to get the Revenue Interim Committee to look at that, because it was Representative Essman is who carried the bill, and she's on the Revenue Committee. But it was voted, they decided not to look into it. So we'll just have to wait till next legislative session.
And interim committees have a few functions. One function is to do studies, and another function is agency oversight. So various agencies are assigned to certain committees, and those committees are responsible for having the agencies come to them and give them presentations on what's going on, what rules they're making, etc. That's always an opportunity potentially for the public to engage. Then there are study resolutions, which are resolutions passed during the session, and the legislature will rank those at the end of the session to determine which ones they are going to study. And then they assign the ones that have the highest ranking to certain committees. And then there are bills, not resolutions, but bills that are required to be studied. Usually they say which entity, which interim committee they want to study that issue. And we'll get to a couple of those or one of those bills in a minute. And so then the committee has to take that up. And then committees, if there's any extra time, committees get to pick other things. Like Anne said, if a resolution did not pass, but there's a member of the interim committee that sponsored it, they might just get their way and get that issue studied. And then the committee has to decide on allocation of staff resources because there aren't very many staff to go around. So they have to figure out how much time they're going to devote. Is it going to just be a staff report to them? Are they going to bring in speakers? Are they going to do a deep dive on certain topics? And those are all things that get decided at the first meeting. Sometimes the second meeting, they usually finalize their work plan at the second meeting. And most committees have already had 2 meetings. So like Anne said, it's a little late, but there's a lot of opportunity for public engagement in all of these interim committees. So even if they're not studying a topic that you're interested in, you might be able to pigeonhole it into a topic that they are considering or agency oversight.
Great. And then did we address the question about the judiciary that Mindy asked?
Mindy, was your question that some of these bills are tangled up in judicial proceedings?
Correct.
No, they don't really address that.
Particularly, let's talk about the EQC, you know, some of those things, and I can picture how rare earth mining might be, the held case might impact rare earth mining or things like that, but they don't really worry about that. Okay.
Once in a while, you will see a committee that does choose to put something on their agenda that is kind of a current topic. So if you want something that's a really current topic on the committee and you know somebody on the committee or you see a friendly face, you can always approach them and see if maybe they could do that as just an educational topic. That does happen once in a while, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are some interim committees that end up putting held on their agendas and inviting Northwestern and all the bad guys to come talk about how awful this decision might be. I wouldn't be surprised at all, especially if EQC did something like that.
Thank you.
So the next 2 slides have to do with energy related issues, and I'm going to talk about them, but Nick Fitzmaurice, Nick, do you want to say hi so people can see your thing light up? Nick is our new energy transition advocate. He's rocking it, and he is going to be helping follow these committees. So if you have questions, you can always contact me, but you can also contact Nick. So the Energy and Telecommunications Interim Committee, again, it's heavily slanted in a partisan fashion. There's 2 Democrats on it and 5, 6 Republicans. That said, it's actually a pretty decent committee. It's usually one of the most, I think, nonpartisan interim committees that we work with because it really does have a lot of cross-cutting issues across party lines. This interim, they are doing what they always do, which is they're going to have PSC oversight. So every single meeting that they have, the PSC presents an update on what the PSC is up to. That's always interesting, often insightful to know where they're at. it became very clear listening to them, for example, at the last meeting, that there was a lot of consternation within the Public Service Commission regarding the rate case that is going to be resolved tomorrow. But, you know, for good or ill, they're going forward with what Northwestern wanted, exactly what Northwestern wanted. So that ETIC does PSC oversight. They also have a study. This is one that did not make it through the process, that they decided because Representative Galloway had proposed a resolution that got killed because of they adjourned the session quickly, very abruptly, thank God. And Galloway was able to convince his fellow committee members that this was still worthy of a study. And I agreed with him. MEIC supported this study resolution. It is about grid regionalization and energy markets and transmission. And for anybody who is paying attention to kind of the wonky world of energy decarbonization, this actually is the linchpin to whether or not we meet our goals, whether or not states who have climate goals can actually attain those goals. We need a different form of sharing energy across state lines in order to take advantage of the regional variation in weather, whether that's the sun shining or the wind blowing, in order to actually provide low carbon energy all the time. And so grid regionalization, energy markets and transmission is not only about affordability, it is about making sure the lights stay on in difficult times and making sure that people are able, or states are able to reach their decarbonization goals. We're going to probably have a webinar on this going forward because it's really dense. It is fascinating and it's really important. So they are looking at this, and I would say if anybody is interested in energy, this is a great section of the agenda to tune in every time, because they're bringing in good speakers. I don't agree with all the speakers, but they're informative, it's interesting, and it really is an issue that, again, cuts across party lines, cuts across state lines, and has a lot of promise for, you know, reliability and affordability. So I would urge everybody who is interested in, you know, how does the energy system get to where we need to be, pay attention to this one. This is the biggest topic in the West right now when it comes to meeting our energy needs and our climate goals. And then the other one is electric power reserves. As I'm sure all of you know, reliability is the mantra of utilities that want to build more big, expensive projects. They like to say the lights are going to go out if we don't build something giant and expensive and make customers pay for it. This is a study that is, you know, it's not a bad idea to analyze it if we were doing it in a really thorough and informed way. I think this is a good idea if you're dealing with people who really understand the energy system really well and understand when they're getting the wool pulled over their eyes by utilities. I worry this group is not that sophisticated. So the electric power reserve study, there's a lot of overlap with the grid regionalization study. It is going to be interesting, and I fear that utilities are going to use it as a launching pad for wanting to make sure that they get whatever they want, or make people think the lights are going to go out. But again, this is another study in which they're going to bring in good speakers, and it's going to be informative and helpful, and it's nice to know what everybody in this space is thinking about how we provide power on a regular basis and in a way that's affordable. So this is one of our primary interim committees, and it doesn't meet again until January, but these, you know, pay attention if any of these topics interest you, or if you're kind of an energy nerd. Any questions about this ETIC committee? Okay, next. The next committee is just for this interim. It is a new committee. This is what this was based upon House Bill 220 that Northwestern Energy proposed and had Rep. Josh Kastmeyer introduce and pass. It is an attempt by Northwestern Energy really to overturn a law that was passed in 2019 and that the Public Service Commission adopted rules on in December 2022. It's a law that has not been implemented yet, and it governs resource planning. So Northwestern's integrated resource plans, as well as their procurement rules. So how Northwestern goes about acquiring new generation resources. Northwestern did not like the 2019 law. It did not like the rules the Public Service Commission adopted. And so it came to the legislature and asked them to revise them. They set up a special select committee to review our process and see if it could be improved. It is a unique committee in that it is not just legislators. You can see that James Brown with the Public Service Commission is on it. The Consumer Council, Jason Brown is on it. You have Montana Dakota Utilities, Northwestern Energy, Mark Klein, who is doing some renewable resource development in the state, and Diego Rivas with the Northwest Energy Coalition. So it's an interesting committee. Their first meeting last month was really, really informative. And I think that going forward, this is going to be an educational experience for all of us. And with any luck, we will not regress in our current legal framework for Northwestern acquiring new resources and planning for those resources. Next meeting date is next week. And I'm going to show you in a minute how you can pay attention to not just that committee, but other committees as well. Any questions?
And I just shared the website for this select committee, and there's an option to sign up for email notifications, and I might be spoiling the next thing you're going to talk about.
But that's okay.
Right. Okay, just by asking if that's something people should sign up for, but I'll let you move on to your next thing.
You're always a step ahead of me. Thank you. Next slide. And then here's a committee that we don't do a lot with, but it is really important. This is the committee that has oversight for the Montana Consumer Council. The Consumer Council is a constitutionally mandated entity of state government that is intended to oversee or to participate in all Public Service Commission proceedings if it requests to do so and represent interest of consumers. I fear the Consumer Council has been cowed after what Senator Steve Fitzpatrick did last session, trying to prevent them from speaking up in the legislature. He ended up withdrawing that proposal, but it really did effectively stop the Consumer Council from coming in on very many bills at all. And I feel like the Consumer Council, it really is a great oversight committee, but I fear that the Consumer Council is kind of living in fear of the legislature taking away its budget. It depends on the legislature for hiring experts to fight utilities like Northwestern Energy. And if it doesn't have a budget to hire economists and technical experts, utility experts, it can't go to bat for consumers. And so the Consumer Council, I think, was successfully cowed last session to a large degree. And this committee, I mean, the council makes me nervous. The committee is actually not bad. But if you know anyone on this committee, feel free to give them a call and say, we need a Consumer Council who's really standing up to these utilities who are raising our rates time and time again. Otherwise, our rates are going to keep going up. We need somebody to bolster the spine of the Consumer Council, who really is in a tough spot with the legislature being in charge of its budget and Northwestern having such power in the halls of the Capitol. They meet on Monday, and generally they meet quarterly. So It's just a committee that oversees what the council does and how it engages with the Public Service Commission in Public Service Commission dockets. Next slide. And then I just wanted to give you a couple, just a little bit of background. So when a committee takes up a study, they do it. This is just a generic analysis of how committees do work. This came from the Transportation Committee, but it's the same in all committees. They ask the staff to do research. They gather input from experts, often around the country, to come and talk to them. They identify more issues. They hear from more experts in the second phase of the study. And then sometime in the summer, they start to narrow those issues and start proposing ideas for legislation. They put together a report, and then they ask for public comment on those reports. Many of you, I am certain, over the years have commented on some of these interim committee reports. They take those public comments and they provide them to the committee, and then the final committee meeting, the committee makes decisions about whether or not that committee will introduce pieces of legislation. And honestly, legislation from interim committees has no better chance of passing than legislation from anybody else. The legislature does not give a whole lot of credence to legislative interim committee proposals. They may now more so moving forward because the committees are partisan. And so the outcome is going to be more biased in favor of Republican ideas. But we'll see. This is, the first go with partisan committees. So in the summertime, we'll probably be asking all of you to help us try to influence these committees to stop them from passing bad bills. And then, or from introducing bad bills, sorry. And then I'm going to share my screen very, very quickly. And that's not what I wanted. Where's share screen? Katie, how come there's share screen. It's lit up in green. I just want to show you how you can follow all this. If you didn't get Katie's links in the chat, you just go to the legislature's main website. Just type in MT-Leg and Google is going to come up with this website, the Montana Legislature. And for interim committees, you go to the center of the page at the top, you click on committees. There are all your committees. You can drop down to any of these committees. Let's go look at Energy and Telecommunications Interim Committee. They're very generic. Most of these committee pages are identical. So on this page, you can see previous meeting minutes, the topics they're going to be studying, their obligations, their legal obligations. It's usually agency oversight. There's no committee legislation yet, but there will be as these committees progress. And then if you want to click on meeting information, you can learn more about their next meeting. This one doesn't have the next meeting up yet, but you can, all of these from the September 28th meeting are linked. So you can see the presentations that have been provided to the committee. You can click on them, you can get their PowerPoints. You can watch the PowerPoints if you go back in time and do the watch and listen from the date of that meeting. You can listen to the presentation and you can scroll through the PowerPoints at the same time if you want to learn. So these, you can always request a remote login in advance of the meeting. Usually it has to be by 5 o'clock the day before. This gives you their upcoming meeting dates. You can watch meetings live from this page. I'm going to go back one step in this. And if you're interested, you can go sign up for any interim committee you want via any of these committees' websites, web pages, because all of them have this here. It says sign up for email notifications. If you click on that, you can either do a text message or you can do an email. I do emails. You type in your name, your email address, you submit, and what comes up is a list of all of the committees that you can subscribe to. So you can see I've subscribed to their press releases, the Audit Committee, Legislative Consumer Committee, Energy and Telecommunications Committee. You can click any of these and then you can submit it at the bottom. So you can get email notifications telling you when a committee is going to occur, when there's an agenda that's up, and you can use the same website to go watch or listen to it online. So all of this is really accessible online, but in person, you also have the opportunity after every agenda item. Let me go back a little bit. So let's go to meeting information. Let me see if I can find one that has an agenda. Let me go to this one. This one is coming up next week. The Special Committee on Energy and Resource Planning and Acquisition. You can see their agenda. You can see there's not much on their agenda. Here's their agenda. Here's the draft agenda. And in the draft agenda, what you'll see is at the end of every agenda item, there is an opportunity for public comment. So every time they cover a topic, you will see public comment being allowed. And that is when you can either via Zoom or in person stand up and say something regarding the topic that they are discussing. So there are a lot of ways to engage with legislative interim committees. It is a more casual atmosphere generally. I find legislators more open and receptive to input during these interim processes. So I would encourage you, if there's a topic you're interested in, get on the mailing list and pay attention once in a while if you have the time. Are there any questions about kind of the logistics of how you can navigate the site?
And one quick thing I just want to add is that if you are planning on making public comment, that's when you need to, if you're going to be online and not in the room, that's when you need to register. But if you, on short notice, decide you want to just watch the hearing, it's possible to just log, just to quickly jump on and zoom in. You don't have to be registered if you're just going to listen in.
Thank you. That's really important. You cannot, if you just log in without signing up in advance, you can't speak.
Right.
So for this, if somebody wants to participate on November 1st, you could watch it online without signing up. There's about a 30-second delay between that and what committee members are hearing. So when you're texting a legislator, they've moved on from that topic. So it's good to request remote participation, which is just like during the session. You basically submit your information and they will send you an email link to a live Zoom feed that you can log on to, and then you can add your comments at the right time. Thank you, Ann. That's a really important point. Okay, I think I can stop sharing my screen. Mindy, did you have a question?
Here I am again. So several of these, well, all the committees that we've seen so far have at least one 2-day event. What do those look like? I mean, is it going to be 8 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon for 2 days?
Generally, no. Usually they'll start a little bit later, like 10 a.m., sometimes 9. And then often on the second day, they're done early. Even if the agenda has them going till 5 on the next day, that is one thing to pay attention to. The timeframes on all of these interim committees cannot be relied on. So if a committee gets finished at 10:30 and they have an agenda item that was supposed to go till 11, they will often just move right into that 11 o'clock agenda item. And sometimes they even have a speaker who can't make the time designated, and so they'll shift a morning and an afternoon presentation. That part can be challenging. The time frames on their agenda are guidance. They are not set in stone.